Imagine living on a tropical island, just going about your day. You see some friends, you see some people who stole your coconut, and you see the Christian missionaries just helping out. Nothing really seems out of the ordinary, but then you hear the chief getting mad and shouting. What's wrong? It stops, though. You kind of just forget about it, don't think anything else. A few hours later, you hear the chief again, but it's even worse this time. You go to investigate and see what the heck's going on, and you see the chief is trying to kill one of the missionaries. The missionary's pretty skillfully avoiding the attacks, but he's not trying to escape. The other missionary that he's with is just too old to escape, and they won't abandon each other. Even faced with certain death at any slip-up, the young missionary would not abandon his friend. Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the story of Saint Peter Calungsod, also known as Pedro Calungsod, a young martyr who had every chance to escape but refused to leave his friend behind. Pedro Calungsod was born in the Visayas region of the Philippines around 1654, and just like many other saints, really not too much is known about his early life. So I think it's safe to say it was a fairly average life for a young Catholic. Otherwise, we'd have some sort of record of it. If he was part of a royal family, there'd be something to say it. If something crazy happened, we'd probably have something. So we're going to say probably led a fairly standard life, maybe more faithful than the average person, but nothing extraordinary. He was a catechist for a group of Spanish Jesuit missionaries, and when they left the Philippines, they traveled together to the Ladrone Islands, which are close to Guam in the Pacific Ocean. Their goal was to bring Christ to the Chamorro people in the region. But it was far from an easy mission. Supplies arrived irregularly, and so they had to ration anything they did get and hope it lasted long enough. The jungle was unforgivingly thick and dangerous, especially for missionaries who had no idea what the region was like at first. And typhoons were a common occurrence. After the missionaries had spent some time there, they renamed the islands to the Marianas Islands in honor of the Virgin Mary and the reigning Queen of Spain at the time, Mariana. But their success in converting the people, they just help out. People would enjoy their kindness and be like, you know what, maybe there's something to what they have to say. And they join them. But it also attracted the wrong kind of attention. I know they always say there's no such thing as bad publicity, but sometimes there is. And this is one of those cases. There was a Chinese healer on the islands named Choco, and he grew jealous of the missionaries and began spreading rumors about them. He said their baptismal waters were poisonous, and through a series of unfortunate coincidences, many started to believe Choco. That's because there were several children who were already sick when they were baptized, and it's done in a way to hopefully save the child. Or if they do pass away, then they would at least be able to go to heaven. But after Choco started saying that they died because of the baptismal waters, people would go for any excuse to blame it on somebody. I mean, losing a kid is a devastating thing. Like, I couldn't imagine going through that. And to go from, oh, it just happened, to, no, it's their fault, a lot of people will latch on to something like that. So couple these newfound enemies with the locals on the island who already didn't like the missionaries, mostly witch doctors and prostitutes. They all sided with Choco, and they helped to spread rumors and slander the missionaries. Eventually, a man named Matapang, who had converted but then apostatized, who deconverted basically, was among the people who started to hate the missionaries after the rumors spread. And Matapang just so happened to be a chief in the region. Matapang had converted before, so Pedro Calungsod and Father Diego went to him one day to baptize his daughter, and they didn't realize that Matapang had kind of changed his mind about them, so it wasn't the best encounter. Matapang vehemently refused to let them anywhere near his children, and he made them leave. As a result, Father Diego and Pedro gathered some children They just went to the beach to sing praises. And they even invited Matapang to join them because, that's what they did. That only made Matapang even angrier, and he stormed off, cursing the missionaries. Matapang wanted Pedro and Father Diego and all of the other missionaries gone, no matter what. He went to his friend, Hyrao, who had actually not converted, but he liked what the missionaries were doing because they helped people out, and he kind of just one of those people that was like, you know what, I don't totally agree with it, but they're being kind, they're helping, I'm fine with them being here. Matapang thought he could rely on his friend to side with him blindly, no matter what, but that wasn't the case. He didn't really want to help at first, but after Matapang called him a coward and insulted Hyrao, it kind of irked him, so he agreed to help. But as this was going on, Matapang's wife had invited Father Diego and Pedro back into their home to baptize the girl. And if Matapang was mad before, he was absolutely livid after this. I'm not going to say that anything justifies what Matapang did, but it also wasn't an entirely appropriate move to go behind his back after he had said not to do it and go and have his daughter baptized. They should have been more civil about it, not so sneaky. Unfortunately, you can't change history, so when Matapang got back, he lost it. He was blinded by his rage, and he started hurling spears at Pedro. Pedro managed to dodge these spears, and witnesses to the event said that he very likely could have escaped if he wanted to, but he would not leave Father Diego, because he knew if he did, Father Diego didn't have a chance at surviving. He would be killed. Eventually, Matapang managed to hit Pedro in the chest with a spear, and he fell to the ground, gasping for air. Matapang then jumped on him and dealt a killing blow to his head. Father Diego gave Peter sacramental absolution, but his demise was already on its way too. Matapang and Hyrao killed Father Diego right after Pedro. And after this, Matapang dragged the two to the beach, boarded a boat, tied rocks to their ankles, and threw them into the ocean. When the other missionaries learned of the pair's fate, they were actually happy for Pedro because he died a faithful martyr alongside Father Diego, and they wholly believed that he was in heaven without an ounce of doubt. Some martyrs, their circumstances are so severe that their death is enough to be canonized. Not all, but sometimes. Pedro Calungsod was not one of those people, though. Actually, he wasn't even beatified the same time that Father Diego was. His beatification was actually fairly recent. It was March 5th, 2000. And that was only after a few years of investigations and examining the evidence of his death. It did help that Father Diego had already been beatified, so many of the documents they had for Pedro, they had already reviewed for Father Diego. And kind of would have been awkward if they were like, it's not good enough for Pedro, but it was good enough for Father Diego. So it is a pretty clear-cut situation with that. But before Pedro could be canonized, he needed to have a miracle attributed to him. And that miracle occurred in 2003. Mrs. Mamerta Telan of Cebu, a province in the Philippines, which was at least the diocese that Peter would have been from, if not the exact town he was from. But Mrs. Mamerta was suffering from a post-operative irritative cerebral insufficiency due to hypoxia because of complications after a mitral valve replacement and a coronary artery bypass surgery. In other words, her brain wasn't receiving enough oxygen that it needed to operate normally. And that could be a seriously life-threatening situation. Now, when I was reviewing the documents from the Vatican's website, it didn't really say who prayed for Pedro Calungsod's intercession, but somebody must have, because this was put towards his cause. It might have just been enough that it was from his diocese. It really wasn't clear on the Vatican's website. I'm assuming somebody in Mrs. Mamerta's family prayed to Pedro at some point. The investigations for Pedro's canonization kind of stalled, though. The first medical investigation board agreed on the diagnosis, the prognosis, and the treatment, but not the healing itself. The doctors present at the operation actually objected to that, and they made them look into it again. But that ended in the same result. And finally, at the third medical council meeting, they determined that it truly was inexplicable. Now, I know you might be thinking, they just kept trying until it happened. If you just keep pushing something, eventually people will be like, you know what? Sure. But it really seems like the doctors from the surgery just didn't provide enough information at the get-go, because the reason it wasn't approved was just there were too many questions that needed to be answered, and the doctors would answer something, and then again there'd be too many questions and they'd answer some more. So I think it was just one of those situations where the doctors at the surgery provided what they thought was enough because they witnessed it. So they're like, we know this was a miracle. But obviously the people that didn't witness it and whose job is to sort of weed out false miracles, they had to do their job and kind of oppose it. And according to the Dicastro della Causa dei Santi, which is the Vatican's website about the Council for the Cause of Saints, the final medical review council obtained all the information they needed. So, that's their wording. They obtained all the information they needed. So that's why I think it's not just a keep trying till it works. It's we need more information. So we're going to say no right now. And then after that information was provided, they're like, we'll check it out again. And again, as I had previously mentioned, that same website that explained the situation with the medical council didn't elaborate on how Pedro Calungsod was declared the one to save Mrs. Mamerta Tellin. But we have to make an assumption that it was either somebody in her family, the doctors, or it might have just been that was the diocese Pedro was from. I also have to add that some sources say Mrs. Tellin died from a heart attack and was revived by Pedro, but that's not what the official Vatican investigation reports. So I think it's a misunderstanding or a problem with translation from other sources. Pedro was canonized October 21st, 2012. His feast day is April 2nd, and he's the patron saint of Filipino youth, altar boys, the Philippines, overseas Filipino workers, for Guam, and for Cebuanos. If you have any questions about Pedro Calungsod's life, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So what do you think of Saint Pedro Calungsod? What about his commitment to staying with Father Diego, no matter what happened? I hope you found his story interesting, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about Saint Pedro. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it with your friends, or send me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find that show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast, and there should be a few episodes uploaded. Take care, and have a wonderful day.